Thanks a lot. We're going to go through this material pretty quick. There's quite a bit to cover, but just a really quick intro. My name is Jeff Martin. I worked for a number of years as a database developer before getting into a niche area known as data governance. I currently work in the data management office of one of the big banks, and so my days are just like I'm immersed in data and data policy pretty much all the time. I'm also a parent, as Bianca alluded to, so I've been in that situation of having to register my daughter for programs, and I've been in the situation as well where we haven't been able to get her into programs because they were full, or they were offered in a neighborhood that just wasn't feasible, or I just couldn't deal with the process at 7 a.m. So I'll skip over this slide. This was covered yesterday morning when we did the intro. I did just want to point out that as far as how this aligns to the poverty reduction strategy, it's around service access. So ensuring that these recreation programs are available to everybody. So first thing we did yesterday was with the help of Mark Richardson, who has worked a lot on this issue, we distilled the challenge down into kind of three different areas. So the first one was to try to answer the question as to whether or not these programs are deployed effectively. And so I'll be speaking a little bit to that. The second area was around ensuring awareness of the programs and services to the communities in the city. And so Bill has a demo he's going to show that kind of speaks a little more specifically to a challenge that he had faced. Hafina as well had done some work around user experience profiling, but unfortunately due to time constraints we won't be able to get to that. And then the third one is around this whole registration and enrollment process, which has been, again, in the media lately, and Jacob has some very interesting ideas about how to possibly change that up a bit. So in terms of this question around whether or not the services or the programs are being deployed effectively, what I did was I went onto the City of Toronto Open Data Portal and just started pulling down the open data set to try to figure out, okay, so like, what is the answer to this question? Are we delivering these programs effectively? And the answer really is, I don't know. And so quickly the question kind of shifted towards, okay, well, what data do we need to answer that question? And what is missing? Like, what is missing from these data sets? I've included here the 7 that I was looking at yesterday. There's probably more, like this probably isn't a complete list. Again, anyone who's maybe familiar with this might be like, oh yeah, you're missing some big ones. But the 2 really kind of important ones, the first one was the recreational historical data from 2015, which was really cool. It was a list of pretty much every single program that had been offered, like every instance of every program that had been offered, and it also had the attendance for each of them. So this one was really the only one that I found that actually spoke to how the programs are being used. Interesting trends in there too. Like when you look at the say programs for older adults, people over the age of 65. It was interesting, so there's twice as many registered programs that are offered as opposed to the drop-in programs, but the drop-in programs were used like twice as much. So from that alone, like you can't really draw any conclusions, but it does raise the question, hey, like is there a barrier for these registration programs? Is there something about, having to fill out a PDF and fax it into the City of Toronto that is maybe, an obstacle for some of these people getting access to these programs? The Wellbeing Toronto demographics, these as well, like a wealth of information in there, a ton of stuff, anything you can think of pretty much for the different wards or the different neighborhoods. Again, just like, so the age demographics, the breakdown of gender, income levels, ethnic origin, whether it's first, second generation, really incredible data sets. So really the idea was to try to link these 2 together, to look at the programs and who's using them and try to tie it into the demographics information to try to get a sense of whether it's meeting needs. The other data sets that I looked at were really a lot of reference information, so a lot of about the recreational programs, like where they're offered, the schedules, that kind of thing. Helpful as well in terms of raising awareness of the programs. Didn't really speak though to how they're being used. Okay, so I'll just go through this really quick. So preliminary analysis, and it's likely incomplete, but what I found was that the biggest problem was, in terms of trying to answer the question of whether these are deployed effectively, was a lack of available registered data. So we really don't know anything about the people who've registered. So we can look at the demographic area data for the area where the program is offered, but we don't really know anything about people who are actually registered for the program. So say you had a program that's everyone loves and is 100% registration every session, but it turns out people are coming from like 3 wards away, it would suggest it's not being deployed effectively. So if you had the postal code, like you're not looking for like a ton of information about the people, but a postal code would be phenomenal. The frequency of the data sets was also a bit of a problem. a lot of this data was from 2011 or 2012. This city is changing way too much for that to really offer a sense of currency. The history of the data sets, they're, at least on the Open Data Portal, I couldn't find anything that went back further than 2008. And even then, there was maybe only a couple of data sets available, so it was really impossible to do any kind of trending. And then granularity as well. I don't think this is necessarily a problem, but it was one of the first questions that I was trying to look into. The Wellbeing Toronto data really corresponds to neighborhoods, which is an aggregation of wards. The parks data sets corresponded to the wards and specifically to the postal code. So there was a bit of a difference there. I don't know if there's challenges in linking it together, but anyway, it was one of the areas that I thought warranted further investigation. I'm keen to look into this more, so if there's anyone here who's, again, who's spent some time on this, I would love to talk as well. The city has committed to a complete revamp of how they, the enrollment system and I guess the system for delivering these programs. Love to learn more about that as well. So on that note, I will pass it over to Jacob.
Great. Switch mics. So I was looking at sort of the question, is this being delivered to the people who need it? And a lot of the 7 a.m. stuff, the stories of success involve 4 laptops, waking up at a certain time, hitting send a lot. Obviously, that creates some problems about who can do it, who has 4 laptops hanging around at 7 in the morning. And so I started trying to solve for this fairness problem, which we've already talked about. And so the city, of course, says, we want to treat people fairly, and that's good, and treating people fairly looks like treating them the same. Is the easiest mechanic to get to fairness is that everybody is treated the same, which, leads to this, right? Which is this, very common now yarn about, if all the boxes are the same size, that's not actually achieving the fairness. If fairness is getting to see the game, equal-sized boxes may not be the answer. So treating people fairly may not equal treating them the same. So this thought experiment then had some key remembrances, right? That we wanted to avoid stigma in treating people differently, that we wanted to increase ease of access, and then mixed program participants is a key thing. So it's not just some programs are used by only poor kids, some programs are used by rich kids. That's not necessarily great for social cohesion. So my thought experiment was, so for every program, let's say we have a 20-person program, we have 60% of that for regular users, 30% of that for super users, and super users are what used to be called priority users. So that's a piece of stigma play to say, no, this is exactly, you are a perfect user. And then the controversial part will be the 10% for sponsoring users. So regular users, this is the same. You do it the same way, but better. Not covered here. Super users then get identified through key partnerships with service organizations, TCH, all these sort of the standard ways in which, we heard around, we've got people's information and we have points of contact. So say they get a super user card with their super user number. 30% of any program gets reserved for super users. You get a 2-day window prior to the 7 a.m. There is concierge through either the recreation centers or libraries to help navigate the insane bureaucracy that hopefully will be fixed by the last slide. Development of asynchronous applications so that, again, you can put an application in and it gets sent at a certain time, but it's not about are you somewhere at a certain time, which is certainly harder for folks. And then below market rates, which already exist, right? So this is the basic real premise of this, is that to treat people fairly, we have to set up a very easy and I think, super way to get folks in earlier and to not think that treating everyone the same. This is the little free market part, and maybe a little less seriously, but playfully. So the sponsoring users, because there gets to be this whole thing of but what about my kids? I can get my kids in. So 10%, so 2 spots are held for sponsoring users, and those are just a cutthroat bloodbath of an auction market in which they have 2 days to outbid each other for those 2 spots. And so whatever they're willing to pay, I realize this may cause like horrible dinners in Forest Hill, but it also then subsidizes, of course, the super users who are the actual intended market for this program, while letting people be like, but my kid needs to go to the school next to my house or to the park. So that's probably not such a great idea. But I do think this notion of giving people access to those programs in a different way is actually probably what is required.
So I guess we have a pretty broad overview of the Parks and Recreation programs. And what I'm presenting is a very, very specific problem I had. Searching for soccer fields, free soccer fields to play. Surprisingly, it's really hard. So I moved to the city a few months ago and I play soccer, so I started looking. I found a few online communities of soccer players and where I asked, so where can I play soccer? Not a single soul has told me that there are drop-in programs in Parks and Recreation. So there's probably some, if people from the city who play soccer doesn't know that, well, how many people actually know? But the second, that's a separate problem. So the other problem was that if I want to just have a ball, I want to kick around with a few friends around, it's just surprisingly hard to find a place you can actually do that, like in some of the poorer country like Mexico, where you can just go kick the ball around with friends. And here, if you kick around, like say your condo, you'll be kicked out because that's a parking lot. You're not supposed to do that. Or if you pick it on the street, oh, that's a safety concern. So you have to be in a soccer field. But finding a soccer field is surprisingly hard. Okay. So I'll show you quickly what we currently have. Well, I closed that page. But anyways, in Parks and Recreation, we do have like a search where you can find fields, but sadly, there's no soccer fields you can search for. Also, when we say we want to find a soccer field, it's not necessarily when I'm a soccer player, I want to find a field to play. I don't necessarily want to play just in Parks and Recreation, the city fields. Maybe I can find a high school I can play at, or maybe just a grass field somewhere. Put a little soccer goal that I can play at, which the Parks and Recreation website only has the city facilities. So I wrote a little, but luckily they shared their data in their open in the city's open data set, and I wrote a little program that allows you to search for the soccer fields, and that shows the grid A, B, C, and then their addresses, and you can see where they are from Google Maps. Now this is a very basic idea, and we can probably expand on that quite a bit more, like showing the map and maybe including all the school soccer fields, and that I didn't find a data set for that, but they're probably somewhere. And if you can include all that together, solve the problem where someone comes in and says, I want to find a soccer field. They go to this website, they can find it.
Nice. Thank you.